Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel update. And as we're set to deliberate some very interesting topics, to include Lebanon, where just this morning we heard the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, coming out and declaring that if his terror organization, or Iranian proxy, pretty much a synonym, would be disarmed by the Beirut government, the country of Lebanon will cease to exist. Something that, of course, will raise many questions as to the path forward. We will discuss also the latest developments vis-a-vis the Gaza Strip. Where are we currently at with a 5-point plan or policy that the Security Cabinet here in Jerusalem has pushed for? And naturally, the Islamic Republic of Iran is very keen to broaden its influence in the region. It's struggling to do so, but nonetheless, it still has not succumbed to the various challenges it faces. And we will also discuss briefly the situation in Syria, where the regime in Damascus continues to besiege the Sueda governorate despite the ceasefire arrangements, controlling some 40 villages, 31 of which have been utterly destroyed, with bodies still scattered across those villages. Currently, the count is roughly 2,000 murdered in this massacre for a people of 1 million, give or take. That's a very significant massacre. But nonetheless, before all that, we will highlight that today we mark day 679 since the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates launched their onslaught on southern Israel, with 50 hostages still in Hamas captivity to date. To at least 20 of them are believed to be alive. Let's introduce our experts for today, to include Mr. Amir Oren, our TV7 editor-at-large, Brigadier General in Reserve, Yaron Rosen, who is the commander of or formerly served as the IDF Chief of Cyber Staff, an Israel Air Force commander, and a fighter pilot. And last but certainly not least, Brigadier General in Reserve, Doron Gavish, commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense. And it's really great to see all three of you. Mr. Oren, let's start today with Lebanon. Naim Qassem has felt some tailwind by the director of the Supreme National Security Council of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ali Larijani, visiting Beirut, telling the government in Beirut, don't, so to speak, with regard to the disarmament of Hezbollah. The Beirut government felt emboldened enough to say, we intend to do, and please do not meddle in our own affairs. But the response has not been delayed. We hear what this Iranian proxy leader has just said this morning, very threatening and very deliberate.
Well, you remember, this is, of course, irrespective of the Trump-Putin summit, that a few months ago, having met with Zelensky, President Trump said that Zelensky and Ukraine don't have cards to play. And while Naim Qassem may try to imitate his predecessor, Nasrallah, and issue threats, obviously these are very hollow threats because Hezbollah doesn't have any cards. And if the challenge to the Lebanese state becomes an armed conflict, the sort of civil war which the Lebanese have grown used to over the last decades, then obviously, first of all, Hezbollah is too weak, and secondly, Iran cannot really help Hezbollah, while Israel, if called upon, can help the Beirut government of President Joseph Aoun and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam. So while we should note what the Hezbollah spokespeople, one cannot call them leaders, and the Iranian emissary have said, it doesn't seem like a serious challenge to the current government authority in Beirut.
An interesting analysis. I will give a different school of thought because I think that 15,000 militiamen, heavily armed with light weaponry, some heavy weaponry, but nonetheless still heavily armed and well trained by their RGC Quds Force colleagues, uh, pose a significant threat to Lebanon domestic. Moreover, in Naim Qasim's speech, he did highlight that he is closely coordinated with the Amal movement, namely of the Beirut parliament speaker, Nabia Berri, and that is something that we also need to take into account. A couple thousand additional militiamen being part of that. So we're talking here about at least 20,000, give or take, militiamen ready to be called upon and to do everything in their power to maintain their munitions at least. And if they do not do so, bring about the collapse of Lebanon. Bringing Israel into the picture, is that a viable reality, General Rosen?
I think that we have to remember that it's very, very different when you fight a war outside. So fighting Hezbollah fighting in Syria, Hezbollah fighting against Israel, and fighting a civil war. That's the first thing. It's very, very different. The second thing is that we've seen in the last, sadly, in the last few years, that men with machine guns and pickup trucks wreak havoc to innocent civilians. So I'm not sure how degraded Hezbollah's power really is. It is partially hollow from the point of before the war. Okay, so they are not as strong as, so their demands might be met, and mostly because I think that President Aoun wants a third of the country, the Shiites, roughly, to be part of Lebanon, because they're a large chunk of the country, which is very, very not homogeneous. So this is where we are with Lebanon, and days will tell if Lebanon will fall back into its past or it has a path to a brighter and safer future. And hopefully Israel will be able to partially help with that in relation to attacking, relevant command and control, maybe making it harder for them. But internal fights won't go down because Israel will intervene. It's just not possible. So I agree. I actually agree with you, Jonathan, on that matter. So moving forward, I think we will need to see if the influence from Israel, the influence from the United States, France, is strong enough to push Lebanon into a better future.
Well, I very much hope so. During the war, before the armistice of the 27th of November of last year, many people at the latter days, including from Washington, from the previous administration, were relaying messages urging Israel to continue against Hezbollah, to diminish its power further, because they knew that the process thereafter would be so much more viable with a diminished power in the context of Hezbollah. Nonetheless, in parallel, the administration itself was putting a lot of constraints on Israel with a lot of threats of various proceedings in international fora, including in the United Nations. So the envoy, Amos Hochstein, was not necessarily in line with some of his colleagues in Washington. And we're reaping those benefits today. I mean, the Lebanese themselves are dealing with this reality today. Israel would have been happy to continue for at least a couple of more weeks, but once you're in a war, you never know how you get out of it. So once a ceasefire, which is tangible, is presented, it's something that most leaders would want to pursue in certain contexts, including the one that occurred in Lebanon. Now, General Gavish, despite not having the majority of their arsenal, we still are talking about a Hezbollah that maintained at least 20% of its heavy munitions that are threatening Israel. Would Israel be drawn into such a scenario and face once again the challenges that we faced during the very lengthy, low Q and low intensity at some large parts of this war, but nonetheless, there were a lot of projectiles, missiles, and rockets, as well as unmanned aerial vehicles that were launched towards Israeli territory.
Well, you're right, Jonathan. We do remember that during the last war with the Hezbollah, the Israeli Air Force mainly struck the Hezbollah quite hard, and we're talking about 70 or close to 80% of their heavy ammunition was damaged. But still, when you're counting it, it is still thousands of rockets that are relevant or could be relevant if the Hezbollah would decide to use it. From the Israeli point of view, I'm not sure that Israel have an interest to take part in whatever war that would be within Lebanon. I think that Israel wouldn't like to be part of any solution in I would say a military way inside Lebanon. I think we should be quite humble and learn from the past that shaping brutally your neighbors inside the inner arena. I'm not sure that this is what is for the best interest of Israel, and I'm not sure that this is what President Aoun would like that would happen. Having said that, it could be that Israel would be dragged into the war, and if Israel would be dragged into the war, that then, of course, Israel would be taking part of it, defending itself, and as we always say, when you are defending against projectiles, you have your offensive operations and not only the defensive operation, because this is the doctrine how to defend yourself. And then I think that the Hezbollah is quite exposed to the Israeli capabilities.
Indeed. That is something that I do agree with Mr. Oren, which mentioned earlier. I mean, Hezbollah is not in a position to challenge Israel at this point. It has the power to project power domestically, not beyond its borders, and if it does so, there will be far-reaching consequences. With regard to the point you made, General Gavish, with Israel not wanting to embroil itself in the wars of others, I do agree, but once you have a civil war in Lebanon, it will spill over in one way or another also to Israel. So Israel does need to take that into account and also be proactive in taking or assuming the role of a regional power at which it is, and also the closest ally of the United States of America in the Middle East. Mr. Oren, let's move to Syria, where we're seeing the Damascus regime attempting to consolidate its power with a very clear pattern where it utilizes various Bedouin clans seeking favor in Damascus to establish friction with the various minorities. Just in the last 48 hours, we saw friction with the Kurds in eastern Syria, both in Deir ez-Zor as well as in Al-Hasaka. It seems like they're now talking about potentially coming to defend those Bedouins who are turning against the Kurds, very similar to what happened to the Druze and still is happening to the Druze in southern Syria, or the Alawites in the west coast. So this modus operandi that they're pursuing is very, very comfortable in the context where Damascus can claim the distancing itself, basically, or that it's not involved in this, but at the same time exploit it for its own interests. Tell us more about this complex environment.
So, had we been sitting around a table or a simulation lab at the U.S. Army War College or at Harvard Business School and looking at the various models, we would probably vote for a strong central government in Damascus rather than having a no man's land with any particular group doing whatever it wants for itself and against the others. But living in the Middle East, we know that in practice, we had better protect our strongest allies, even if it means that the Ashara regime in Damascus gets to be weaker than what the US administration would like. And, you know, the other day, the outgoing commanding general of the IDF's Northern Command, Major General Ori Gordon, when he summed up his years in office, took pains to point that our brethren, the Druze in the Sweda governorate, which you mentioned, that they are also part of the Israeli strategic calculus. However, answering another question, he noted that Sweda is relatively far from the Israeli border, meaning that Israel would like the Ashara regime to refrain from acting and, of course, massacring, but it is not always practical for Israel to intervene immediately. So, on balance, Israel would like the Druze and other communities to be able to fend for themselves. But if it comes to massacres, Israel has not only a strategic interest, but also a human interest in trying to prevent it.
Indeed. Well, General Goldin should have noted also that it's roughly 80 kilometers, which is, if you take a direct route, roughly an hour and a half from the border of Israel towards Sweda. Sweda is currently under siege. Just to put things into context, some 2,000 people plus have been murdered and accounted for. There are expected to be more since many of the bodies are still scattered. Roughly 800 people are missing, and roughly 550 people have been kidnapped from the Druze villages and towns, Christians as well. At least 2 Christian villages have been razed to the ground, and multiple Christians have been also murdered, including one pastor, Khaled Mezil, which is, of course, a very significant figure, at least in the Christian community, the evangelical community in Sweda. And we need to look at things in context. They don't have enough food. Water scarcity is becoming worse and worse, with 20% capacity right now, potentially diminishing in the next 2 weeks to 8% of the entire population. So we're seeing the development right now, as we're speaking, of a human or humanitarian catastrophe, far beyond the numbers that Hamas is projecting in the Gaza Strip right now. But General Wazen, I'd like to hear your take on this from a strategic approach. If this Islamist government of the so-called Ahmed al-Shara, also known by his Al-Qaeda years and Islamic State years as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, if he manages to take over the southern border with Jordan and start putting troops which are very much fully believing the doctrines of Al-Qaeda and Islamic State along the borders with Israel, and slowly accumulating the number of troops that are going to be trained according to an MOU signed yesterday by Turkey for the purpose of really making their military a sizable one. Is that something that Israel can accept?
No, it cannot. And that is the realpolitik and real militarik, which he spoke about some while ago. Israel will have to deal with this, and this needs to start now. Ahmad al-Shara is waging an internal proxy war against his own people, namely the minorities, which is a very bad thing for himself after stating that that Syria is for all its citizens. So he's not standing up to his promise after conquering the whole country. That's the first thing. The second thing, Israel will have to maintain some kind of balance of power projection from Israel and sort of figure out how to keep, first of all, and mostly its own north safe, while doing that, keep the Druze safe, because our relationship with the Druze citizens in Syria is special and unique, and there's no other country in the world that did do anything such as Israel did in the past few months for the Druze in trying to help them cope with this with these savages, basically. The third thing I think, which is very important, is that the U.S. EU should use their leverage through Turkey. Turkey is a NATO member, and Turkey cannot cannot turn a blind eye to what's going on in Syria. So if Turkey, a NATO member, is responsible for training Ahmad al-Shara, and the US and EU have opened their pockets and doors to the West, maybe we need to close the door again, and maybe Turkey should be responsible of what Ahmad al-Shara, its protege, is doing in Syria right now. That's, I think, the three things that we have to pay attention to right now.
Well, the Syrian foreign minister traveled to Ankara, where he met with the Turkish foreign minister Hakan Fidan just yesterday, during the course of which the Turkish top diplomat announced that the massacres perpetrated by the jihadists in southern Syria were the responsibility and the fault of Israel. So apparently their twisting of the facts for their own interests, it really dumbfounds sometimes to see those type of statements coming out. From there, he traveled to Qatar to coordinate with their counterparts in Doha on the latest developments both in Syria and Gaza. So naturally, their intentions are directed at how to confront Israel on every front possible. But nonetheless, General Gavish, we do not have very much time left, and I still would like to ask you on the Iranian question. The Iranians are increasing their rhetoric towards Israel, threatening time and again. What should we take into account with regard to the threats emanating out of the Islamic Republic?
Well, Jonathan, I think that we should highlight something which is super relevant for all the three arenas that we are discussing, for Iran, for Syria, and for Lebanon, and this is really the United States. The decision of the United States, how much it would be involved in those arenas, it is super relevant for Israel. We could do whatever we could do by ourselves, but we really have to remember that the United States is the one that, let's put it simply, could help Israel in all those three arenas, or I would say Israeli interest, which I believe they are in parallel with the region interest. It is not only Israeli interest. So what would be the next step with Iran? This is a big question. I think that if Iranians would continue with the rhetoric, if the Iranians would be in a position as they are now, that basically they are not really negotiating a deal, I believe that it would come to a point that decision would have to be made, mainly in Washington, and this is something that we all have to take into account. From the Israeli part, we have to continue building ourselves for both offensive and defensive operations if they would be needed. Another thing that I would add in short with regard to those three regions is going back to the Israeli national strategy. And we mentioned it, Jonathan, more than once, that even without announcing it, when you're looking at the Israeli national strategy, so prevention, this is another pillar that was added basically to our national strategy. And prevention means that you need to do whatever you need to do and not wait for your threats to grow around you, to your enemies to be strong in a position that they would pose a significant threat to Israel. So I think that it's very interesting, but almost the same answer to those three different regions within the Mediterranean.
And let's not also forget the Gaza Strip. Mr. Owen, you have 1 minute on that. Were the negotiations right now that have been waged by Egypt and their Islamist Hamas in the last 48 hours?
Well, the gaps are still too wide to be bridged, but it is regrettable that in a meeting in Alaska, the only topic one hears about, at least outside of the small circle of people in the know, about the agenda is Ukraine. Because hopefully Trump can ask Putin to put pressure both on Hamas. Hamas was quite welcome in Moscow, as well as on Iran, because if he does that, and if Putin, for his own reasons, reciprocates, then we might have some breakthrough.
Indeed. Well, two of the most senior defense officials of both Iran and Russia just met in Kyrgyzstan, I think, or Tajikistan, one of those stans in that area, stan, Persian for region, of course, during the course of which Moscow and Tehran reaffirmed their unique strategic alliance from a principle of how did they call it, good neighborly relations or good relation anyways. So Moscow and Tehran have very close interests. They're both, of course, very anti-Western at heart, but they are also strategic rivals, something that we also need to take into account. This is all the time that we have for today. So I'd like to immediately thank Mr. Oren, General Kavish, and General Rosen for all of your insights. And I'd like also to thank all of you at home as well. This has been TV7's Israel at War update from here in Jerusalem. Wishing you a Shabbat Shalom.